The French president has a plan to protect the Republic, but French Muslims say it stigmatizes them. Emmanuel Macron wants to combat what he calls radical Islam, but will his attempt to impose a national identity on a culturally diverse society work? I'm Ali Hassan, and today's newsmaker is France's proposed anti-separatism legislation. Emmanuel Macron's bill targeting separatism seems, rather ironically, to be putting the country's motto of liberty, equality and fraternity to the test. The president's idea is to foster what he describes as an enlightened Islam, one that will help defeat terrorist threats and preserve the French way of life. But French Muslims fear the bill unfairly singles them out and will contribute to a rise in Islamophobia. Today, I'll ask our guests what they make of this controversial legislation. But first, Natalie Pahonen reports on what the bill proposes.
France is home to Europe's largest Muslim population. Its president, Emmanuel Macron, says Islam is a religion in crisis. And he went to a Parisian suburb, home to mostly Muslims, to outline a plan against what he calls Islamist separatism.
Il y a, dans cet islamisme radical, puisque c'est le cœur du sujet, abordons-le et nommons-le, une volonté revendiquée, affichée, une organisation méthodique pour contrevenir aux lois de la République et créer un ordre parallèle, ériger d'autres valeurs, développer une autre organisation de la société, séparatiste dans un premier temps, mais dont le but final est de prendre le contrôle complet, celui-ci. Nous avons nous-mêmes construit notre propre séparatisme. C'est celui de nos quartiers. C'est la ghettoisation que notre République, avec initialement les meilleures intentions du monde, mais a laissé faire.
He says that system of concentrating populations based on their origins has resulted in poverty and problems, and it's left a vacuum often filled by radicals. Some of the proposals in this bill include imams being trained and certified in France, not overseas, greater control of foreign funding of mosques, and attending school will be compulsory unless there's a medical reason. The principle of French secularism, or laïcité, is a bedrock of the Republic. At the turn of the 20th century, the Catholic Church wielded significant power and influence. But a clear barrier was put up in 1905 with a law separating church and state. It means the state has to be neutral to all faiths. And while people can belong to any religion, those displays should be kept in the private sphere. In recent years, there's been criticism from the Muslim community that they've been targeted for openly expressing their faith. A 2004 law banning religious symbols and attire from public schools was viewed by many as policing the hijab. Members of the community have also felt stigmatized following a series of terror attacks since 2015. Keep in mind the 2022 presidential election is on the horizon. Macron's main rival will likely be the far-right National Rally's Marine Le Pen. She's welcomed the plan.
Now
I would like the decisions that are taken in the coming weeks and months to be effective, to be extremely firm, because I think that we have lost a lot of time and I wouldn't want us to lose the fight.
There are concerns Macron is using the bill to attract voters on the right. The president has framed this as being about unity and strengthening secular values. But will it end up creating further divisions in society by alienating members of this community? Natalie Pahonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New York is Denis Franceskin. He's a member of Marine Le Pen's National Rally and the party's representative abroad. In London, we have Nabila Ramdani. She's an award-winning French-Algerian journalist. And in Paris is activist Yasser Louati. He's the head of the Justice and Liberties for All Committee and the co-author of the European Islamophobia report. Welcome to you all. Nabila, Emmanuel Macron says his anti-separatism bill will crack down on Islam, is radical Islam, protect the Republic and preserve France's secular system. Let me get your first reaction.
Well, the first thing I would say is that the timing of President Macron's speech was as poor as the way he tried to project it. All communities, including Muslim ones, are suffering hugely in the middle of a global health emergency. Yet Macron thought it was worth focusing everybody's attention on what he clearly defined as yet another problem that threatens society. He very quickly spoke of Islam as being in crisis all over the world, and he linked it with separatism. If only superficially this was cruel and unnecessary, it was obvious to everybody that this kind of a framing of a very complicated issue would stir up Islamophobic feeling. And of course, that's exactly what it did. And remember too that there is currently a very high-profile trial going on in Paris in which 14 people who are meant to have assisted in the Charlie Hebdo attacks are being judged. This too inevitably stirred up ill feeling against some 6 million Muslims or so living in France in a manner which is utterly unjust. Yet Macron chose to make the situation even worse with this inflammatory speech. And you know, the absurd reality is that if you make a keynote speech about alleged division, you are going to create even more actual division, and it's exactly what Macron did. Let me give you a specific example of the stigmatization that was involved in what Macron was saying. He wanted to limit homeschooling for Muslim children. This is at a time when pretty much all parents are being encouraged to keep their children and indeed their families at home because of coronavirus, and indeed spend more time on homeschooling. The overall message is that Muslims cannot be trusted in private spaces, and they need constant monitoring. The dynamic, the entire dynamic behind the speech and indeed the proposed legislation is that monitoring, the need to watch Muslims in their homes, in their schools, in their colleges, in their mosques. And the details of the legislation haven't been worked out yet, but it's obvious that they will include increased powers to the police and security services, and indeed neighbors who want to spy and report. And this is the very definition of totalitarianism.
Ill-timed and misguided, Nabila Ramdani calls the bill. Denis, let me get your reaction on the proposal of the French president.
Well, I would agree with what our colleague just said. It's a very bad timing. It's weird. We know that the COVID situation, Macron and his team have not handled it properly. So it's just interesting and somehow, sadly funny that we start to talk about those issues. Those issues have been constantly been approached by the National Front and by Marine Le Pen for the past 20 years. I disagree with her when she says that that all the Muslims feel bad about what Macron said. Macron was very specific on extreme Islam. So now, if you feel upset because someone's criticizing extreme Islam, then there's indeed a problem, and I think that's what he was pointing out: is we're making the difference between Islam as a faith and Islam as a political agenda. And Macron was defining in that speech Islam as a political agenda. It had nothing to do with faith.
Yes, sir, indeed. So Emmanuel Macron says radical Islam undermines French values, creates a counter-society, and lays the groundwork for terrorism. He didn't speak of French Muslims. He spoke of radical Islam. Is that distinction satisfactory to you, or are you displeased nonetheless?
Well, the problem when it comes to speaking of radical Islam, Islamism, whatever ism they come up with, is that we don't have a clear definition of that. So if you quote, for example, a study report of 2017 by Jean-Marie Bockel, he says that radicalization, quote unquote, has been adopted under the pressure of events, and that the term itself is ambiguous, which means that you can accuse anyone of being a radical in order to prosecute them, criminalize them, and kill the character. Now, speaking of the term separatism, the term was used by Emmanuel Macron right after the anti-rallies against police brutality and systemic racism in the wake of the racist murder of George Floyd. That's when separatism was brought to the table by Emmanuel Macron, doubled down by Gérald Darmanin, his Minister of Interior, who spoke of ensauvagement, which means people acting like wild beasts. But if you were to talk about separatism, let's speak of class separatism of people who don't pay over 100 billion euros per year in tax evasion, racial separatism, white supremacy groups setting up paramilitary camps throughout France and sending people to train in the Ukraine, or for example, the far-right party of Marine Le Pen getting Russian funding for her campaigns. We can also speak of geographical separatism by the rich who want to live aside from the rest of society. For example, a city in the in the south side of Paris, the mayor would rather pay 6.5 million euros in fine and not provide public housing. Now, of course, there is the real separatism amply documented that we do all know about, and there is the hoax, the conspiracy theory about Muslims calling for separatism. Now, may I ask, which Muslim organization in France, Muslim leader in France, called for separation from the French Republic? As a matter of fact, a European Commission survey from the Fundamental Rights Agency of 2017 showed that despite discrimination, Muslims in France are still trusting the state to uphold their rights. Now, of course, I agree with both speakers before me that the timing was poor, but we know that Emmanuel Macron does what any failed politician does, is Islamodiversion. Create a Muslim problem when you fail politically, economically, and socially.
Right.
And now, 18 months before the upcoming presidential election.
For sure. I mean, with the timing, we will get to it in just a moment. But Denis, I saw you shake your head there when Yasser was speaking. Which part of his answer did you disagree with?
Yes, he was talking about separatism. I remind you that Macron is not the first one. President Hollande before him talked about partition. And Minister Jarcon also, before he left office, said that we are, quote, we are side by side, and tomorrow we will be face to face. So it's not like a new thing that Macron suddenly, invented. That's something that gradually.
Where is it documented?
Pardon me?
Where is it documented? It is no. You are the first party to say that those politicians are liars, and now you quote them as if their word was the gospel. Now, if they speak of separatism, where is it documented that Muslims are calling for it?
No, I'm sorry. Hollande quote about calling partition that was with journalists of Le Monde. It's in a book. I can send you a link if you want. It's not.
Okay, so François Hollande, who was the first ever president not to run for re-election under the Fifth Republic, is now saying the truth when he speaks.
Right. Let me bring in Nabila here, because France is, of course, home to Europe's largest Muslim minority, and many French Muslims have already expressed their concern after the announcement of this proposed legislation, saying it stigmatizes them, it unfairly singles them out, and might increase Islamophobia in France. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I think France is determinedly a secular republic to the extent that the establishment and the political class as a whole pervert the very concept of secularism and its meaning to spread much anti-religious feeling across all sections of society, from the far right to the hard left. They simply don't like strong identities, least of all ones which are considered to be foreign ones. And it was very interesting how Macron accentuated the issue of preachers coming from abroad to allegedly subvert French Muslims. So there is clearly a problem with extremism or extremist interpretation of Islam in the Middle East, but Macron gave the distinct impression that it was Islam by definition, that was something foreign and therefore undesirable per se. Now, the great myth of French Islamophobia is often that it's not directly aimed at Muslims at all. But this is, of course, ridiculous in most cases. For example, the pretense behind the burqa ban was that it was in fact just a routine measure at anyone wearing head coverings inappropriately, be they balaclavas or Catholic veils. But of course, this was nonsense. The legislation was primarily aimed at putting Muslim women in their place and showing that anybody who looked too Muslim could expect trouble. Now, the separatism discourse is exactly the same. Politicians pretend that they are clamping down on all forms of radicalism when it's obvious that the main target is Islam, full stop.
Denis, Nabila has already mentioned France's traditional secular system known as laïcité, which is designed to separate religion and public life. In your personal view, is Islam compatible with France's republican and secular values?
Well, I'd like to say something first, because I feel that for our colleagues, criticizing Islam, like they feel personally attacked. I want to make sure that everybody understand that for us there's a difference between the faith and the difference between the political agenda that the faith implies. Okay, I know a lot of Muslims in France. I never had any problem with them. They're great people. So I'm not going to condemn, their faith at all. They're free to do whatever they want in terms of their faith. Like, who am I to judge? They believe in God. Who am I to judge? The question is the civil code from France is compatible with the Quran? That's the question. I do not think that it's fully compatible. I do not think that it's okay to close, for instance, some swimming pools to allow, women, Muslim to bathe because they don't want to be close to other people, close to men. I don't think it's okay for a bus driver, Muslim bus driver, to refuse to go to work because before him there was a woman who was bus driving. Like, those are like everyday life questions. And our friend talked about the burqa. Again, we are facing a political agenda versus what France stand for and what France believe. And
so if I understand you correctly, Denis, in your view, it's incompatible to be both French and Muslim. Do I understand you correctly?
Can you repeat? I'm sorry.
It is incompatible. It is incompatible in your personal view to be French and Muslim at the same time.
No, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. I said if you want to leave your Muslim faith as a political agenda, then there's tons of countries in the world, to live with. If you go to France, if you want to live in France, then you need to understand that France is a Catholic country, Roman Catholic country. Okay.
No, it's not.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
It's a secular country. Yes or no?
Why is it not? Why is it? If you go in every town, every village, there's a church in the middle of the village. Historically, France
is a secular republic. It's a secular republic. You can't have it both ways, sir. So if it's a secular republic, I do agree on that. I'm a staunch believer in laïcité, separation of politics and religion. Now, you can't on one hand say it's a secular country and then say France is Roman Catholic.
You refuse to see, I hear what you say, but you refuse to see the impact of history. France, historically speaking, is a Catholic country. Okay, so and everything you can see, in everyday life. Pardon me?
Yeah, and before being Catholic, it had another religion. We're talking about the current legal framework of the French Republic. It's a secular country. Yes or no, sir? Is it a secular country?
Since 1905, there's a separation between church and the states. Yeah, if this is what you want me to say, yes, I agree. Since 1905, but it doesn't mean that historically speaking, the French has no Roman Catholic roots. Refusing to see that, it's the historically like nonsense.
Yeah, but we have to agree on, if I may, sir, is that there is a framework in which we all live. All right, and that framework, the legal one, is a secular one, which means no one can impose his beliefs upon others. Now, if France is a secular country, that means the state has no right whatsoever to interfere in religious affairs, not to promote a favorable brand of whatever religion, to promote whatever Christian school of thought they like. It's completely separate. Now, I have not seen Muslims, I may be wrong, but I have not seen Muslim organizations calling for the thwarting and the cancellation of laïcité in order for them to impose their religion. However, if you want to speak about history, the organization that bitterly fought the 1905 law of laïcité was the Catholic Church, and that laïcité was applied on metropolitan France, but not in Algeria, in order to keep Islam under control, the same way Emmanuel Macron today is trying to do it. Go beyond laïcité, violate laïcité, so the state can control Islam and Muslims. I think Muslims should manage their religious affairs, okay? And then, of course, live according to the secular laws of the Republic, which they are already doing and calling for.
Right.
But right now we see the rules of the game being changed, saying that Muslims cannot manage their own affairs, so the state will do it for them. And that's completely unacceptable.
Nabila, let's talk about the timing. France is 18 months away from an election, and many people view Macron's announcement as an opportunity to show that he takes a hard line on crime, on immigration, that he will not leave himself open to attacks from the far right. Do you think he's covering his grounds 18 months before the election?
Well, absolutely. I think, in short, Macron was trying to attract the far-right vote, which is a very sizable vote in France. Macron came second to Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National in 2017, and they are a massively Islamophobic party. And Macron wants some of their votes when he runs for re-election in 2022. And dare I say, I think he's Gérald Darmanin, Macron's hardline and very anti-Muslim new interior minister, summed up the speech best when he said that France was at war against Islamic terrorism. What he meant to say was that France is at war with Islam, but he didn't want to sound too controversial. The war against Muslims in France can be very underhand, and Macron projecting Muslims as a major problem in society is an example of how it is fought. Now, politicians of left and right are obsessive about the subject, and they do anything to go on to highlight it. Now, the proposed law package is all part of this war. It's all about interference in Muslim communities. The deceit is that Muslims cannot be trusted to deal with their own affairs and that they need a huge amount of control. Money is being offered as a way of sweetening the increased interference. For example, Muslim institutions will be receiving extra fundings, but only in return for more control. And it's all very cynical indeed. And of course, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that stigmatizing Muslims through new proposed laws was a way of diverting attention from the government's terrible management of the coronavirus crisis. So I think that the future of Muslim communities in France is very bleak indeed. And as with most post-war presidents, Macron has chosen to stigmatize Islam at a time when there is already a huge amount of antipathy towards Islam in the West. The focus is always on the extremes, while the vast majority, that is to say, millions of Muslims who are outstanding French citizens, will be the ones who suffer ultimately.
Right. Denis, are you concerned that President Macron is fishing in your ponds, stealing away subject matters, topics, and thus voters in the end from you?
Who knows? I don't trust him at all. I'd like to remind you guys that he was elected on multiculturalism. He was elected on liberalism. And now suddenly he speak about something that, was lingering, I would say was like an underground movement that was lingering for many years, and now he speaks about it. Do I think it's just only political? Maybe. But it also comes, in a variety, in a series of terrorist attacks that are linked to extreme Islam. So for a president not talking about it will be seen as a complete denial. So I think he also has to talk about it. I also think that if a president, it took 3 years for him to start to talk about those topics. To me, it means that he probably learned a lot of things while he was in office, and maybe the situation is even worse than when we think. So is it political? Maybe. Again, I don't trust Macron. Just look at how he handled the COVID situation. But I don't think he will benefit from it, to be honest with you, because the people who voted for him.
Yes. And the people who voted for him, this is actually the last question, Yasser, as we are running out of time. Denis has already said that Macron ran on a multicultural platform. Do you think with this proposed legislation, he has lost the Muslim vote?
ago, the problem is it is true, and I have to agree on the speaker before me that Emmanuel Macron did run on a so-called what we call a legal laicity, that we stick to the law and not go beyond that. But Emmanuel Macron has surrounded himself by staunch Islamophobes, Jean-Marie Blanquer, Laurent Bouvet, Patrick Kessel, and the list goes on. The architecture of modern day, oftentimes left-wing Islamophobia. But now, Nicolas Sarkozy knows better. When you start hunting on the land of the far right, which means racialism, Islamophobia, bigotry, etc., you end up losing because people will take the original copy and not people trying to look like them. Now, Emmanuel Macron has, I think, made a major mistake by thinking that by delving into identity politics, he will cover up his failures. COVID-19, 32,000 people died, 100,000 people are pressing charges against the current administration. And on top of that, a mandate that has been marked by the Yellow Vest movement, police brutality made bare in broad daylight against them, etc. So no, Emmanuel Macron in the end will not win thanks to this Islamo diversion strategy.
Yasser Louati, Nabila Ramdani, and Denis Franceskin, thank you so much for your take on Macron's proposed anti-separatism bill. Thank you out there for watching, of course. Hope to see you again next time when we're back with a new edition of Newsmakers.